For the first time in modern history, a young African president told the most powerful man on earth, "We don't want your charity. We want you to stop taking from us." That president was Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. And the man he said it to? Donald J. Trump. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't staged. It happened during a private phone call, triggered by a leaked document revealing a quiet but brutal move. The United States was preparing to impose a 30% tariff on every export coming from Traoré's country. No warning, no negotiation, just economic execution. Most leaders would have waited, issued a diplomatic protest, held a press briefing. Traoré didn't. He picked up the phone and called Trump directly. And what happened over the next 23 minutes may change how you see Africa, how you see America, and how you define power. This wasn't just about trade. It was about a continent tired of being silenced. It was about a single mother in Ouagadougou named Sarah, who stitches clothes for American shelves and feeds a family of 5. And it was about what happens when small nations decide to stand, not beg. Traoré didn't speak in fear. He spoke with fire. He laid bare what Washington never expected to hear: the hidden cost of America's policies, paid in African hunger, instability, and migration. He didn't ask for help. He warned of consequences. And somewhere in that conversation, the unthinkable happened. Trump listened. What did Traoré say that made a billionaire president go silent? Why did U.S. intelligence agencies begin tracking his every word? And what does it mean when a 35-year-old leader dares to confront a global order that's lasted for decades? Stay with us. This is more than a phone call. It's a warning shot from the heart of Africa. It began with whispers, uncorroborated chatter between diplomats, a few leaked memos, nothing concrete. But what those rumors carried was enough to make a room of senior economic advisors in Burkina Faso go pale. The United States was preparing a 30% tariff on all goods exported from their country. Not 5, not 10, 30%. That number hit like a missile. For most Americans, it might sound like a policy debate. But in Burkina Faso, a landlocked nation in West Africa, it was a death sentence for entire industries. For cotton farmers, for textile workers, for the fragile hope of economic independence the country had worked so hard to build. When President Ibrahim Traoré heard the news, his response wasn't political. It was personal. 3 years ago, he'd visited a textile cooperative in Ouagadougou. There, he met a young woman named Sarah. At just 23, Sarah worked 10 hours a day at a sewing machine, producing clothes that end up in American discount stores. She earned enough to feed her infant daughter, pay for her mother's medicine, and keep her 2 brothers in school. She didn't have much, but she had dignity. Now imagine what happens when a 30% tariff suddenly makes her factory's products unaffordable in the US market. Overnight, the orders stop. The machines fall silent. Sarah loses her job. Her family falls into crisis. Her brothers drop out of school. Her daughter goes without treatment. And like so many others, Sarah begins to consider something unthinkable: walking north through desert and danger, chasing hope that may never come. This was not a political abstraction. It was the human cost of economic policy. And Traoré saw it clearly. His team scrambled to find an official notice, a diplomatic briefing, even a courtesy email. Nothing. Washington had made its move in silence, without consultation, without warning, without a single thought for the 22 million people whose lives hung in the balance. To Traoré, this wasn't just about trade. It was about message. It was about respect, or the lack of it. He believed this tariff wasn't designed to protect American jobs. It was meant to remind Africa of its place. A place beneath the table expected to be grateful for crumbs. A continent tolerated but never trusted. Engaged but never empowered. And so, Traoré did something no African leader had done in decades. He bypassed protocol. He bypassed fear. He picked up a secure line and called Donald Trump directly. The US. President answered with the tone of a man expecting deference. He spoke of American interests, economic strategy, and the burden of protecting jobs at home. Traoré listened. Then he began to speak, not as a subordinate, but as a sovereign. Not to negotiate, but to warn. He told Trump about Sarah. He described the ripple effect of a factory closure in West Africa, becoming a migration crisis in southern Europe, of families torn apart, of desperation weaponized by smugglers and extremists. He explained that when America destabilizes African economies, it plants the very seeds of the global instability it claims to fight. But it wasn't just Sarah's story that shook the conversation. It was the truth behind the numbers. Burkina Faso exports raw cotton to America and buys back finished clothes. It extracts gold, but foreign companies hold the profits. For every dollar the US Sends in aid, African countries return 5 in debt payments, raw resources, and lopsided trade terms. We are not being helped, Traore said. We are being harvested. That's when the silence on the other end of the line got heavy. But what Traore said next would shift the tone of the call and possibly the future of US-Africa relations. Stay with us. There's a moment in every confrontation when the room goes quiet, when truth cuts through protocol, and even the powerful are forced to listen. For Ibrahim Traoré, that moment came 12 minutes into the call. After laying out the brutal impact of the tariffs, not in charts or statistics, but through the eyes of a woman named Sarah, he paused. Then he said something no African leader had dared say directly to a US president in recent memory. I don't want anything from you, Mr. President. I want you to stop taking from us. The line went dead silent. For a second, Traoré thought the call had dropped. But Trump was still there, just stunned. It was a shift. Not just in tone, but in the balance of power. The voice coming through that phone wasn't desperate. It wasn't begging. It was declaring something deeper than any negotiation. Africa would no longer ask for permission to exist with dignity. Traoré didn't stop. He spoke of generations of African farmers forced to sell raw cotton at rock-bottom prices, then buy back clothes they could have made themselves, if only they'd been allowed. He described gold mines run by foreign companies, extracting billions in value while leaving behind nothing but empty pits and poisoned water. He spoke of an educated, ambitious youth with no future but migration or worse, radicalization. Then he asked a question that wasn't rhetorical. It was surgical. Why do you think Africa deserves less respect than China? Trump didn't answer. Instead, he changed the subject, started talking about security, terrorism, instability. He reached for the familiar talking points. But Traoré was ready. He told him that in Africa, the greatest threat isn't terrorism. It's hopelessness. A young man with no job is a recruit waiting to happen for anyone offering food, identity, purpose. Whether that's a terrorist cell, a criminal network, or a boat across the Mediterranean. If you want peace, Mr. President, Traoré said, don't send soldiers. Send fairness. The clarity was unsettling. Trump, to his credit, began to ask real questions. Not about how to manage Africa, but about how to work with it. What would a fair deal look like? What would it take to let African industries process their own resources? How could trade be rebalanced to serve both sides? For a brief moment, the call transformed, from confrontation to possibility. But outside that phone line, the world was already reacting. In Washington, senior advisors were briefed. Intelligence analysts flagged the call. One noted that Traoré had become an unpredictable variable in West African stability. Another called him a populist with an audience. But in Ouagadougou, it was different. News of the call spread through markets and villages like wildfire. Radios replayed quotes. Women in textile cooperatives cheered. Farmers listened with quiet pride. They weren't celebrating defiance. They were celebrating dignity. One shopkeeper near the central square put it simply, finally, someone spoke for us. Not as beggars, as equals. But Traoré knew this call was only the beginning. And what came next would test everything. Because standing up to power is one thing, making it change is another. When the threat of a 30% tariff reached the people of Burkina Faso, it didn't arrive as a news headline. It arrived as fear. In the villages of Bobo Dioulasso, families gathered around old radios, listening to every word from Traoré's office. In the textile districts of Ouagadougou, factory managers reviewed their contracts and held back tears. Orders were already slowing. Western buyers were hesitating. Whispers spread. If this goes through, we won't last a month. The civilian toll was immediate and brutal. In the northern provinces, farmers who relied on cotton exports began stockpiling unsold bales. Without foreign demand, the price dropped overnight. Trucks stopped running. Laborers were laid off. In one region, over 3,000 workers were dismissed within a week. Men and women who now had no way to feed their families. But it wasn't just economics. It was dignity. It was identity. Burkina Faso, a country already battling insurgency, now faced a deeper war, one against despair. Young people, educated, restless, full of ambition, began to ask hard questions. Why study if there are no jobs? Why stay if the system rewards submission and punishes effort? For many, the answer was migration. For others, it was silence. And for a few, it was the allure of extremist networks promising power, purpose, and revenge. One father in the Sahel region, a former teacher turned farmer, said it best. They are not joining terror because they hate us. They are joining because they think we failed them first. In Ouagadougou, political tension rose. Opposition leaders who had once mocked Traoré for his firebrand speeches now struggled to find footing. The people weren't interested in partisanship. They wanted protection. They wanted someone who would fight for their future. Traoré's popularity surged, but so did the pressure. Western embassies issued quiet warnings. Your rhetoric may damage bilateral relations. A few even threatened to freeze development programs. The message was clear: speak softly or pay the price. But Traoré refused to retreat. He doubled down, visiting factories, listening to workers, holding town hall meetings across provinces. One woman, a widow with 3 children, told him through tears, "We have nothing left but our pride. Please don't let them take that too." It was no longer just about trade. It became a national reckoning. A question echoed across airwaves and prayer halls. If Burkina Faso bends now, what will we have taught our children? But while the streets of Ouagadougou stirred with resolve, the corridors of Washington were moving too. And what they were planning would test Traoré's resolve like never before. In Washington, the phone call between Ibrahim Traoré and Donald Trump sent ripples through the system. The initial response was predictable. A White House spokesperson dismissed the conversation as routine diplomatic engagement. But behind closed doors, the tone was very different. At the Pentagon, analysts flagged the call as a strategic disruption. The CIA compiled a profile of Traoré, labeling him an emerging nationalist voice with regional influence. Congressional aides whispered about another Sahel problem. And at the State Department, a quiet debate began. Was Traoré just another populist or the beginning of something bigger? US media, initially uninterested, began to pick up fragments. Headlines surfaced: African leader confronts Trump over trade and Traoré warns US. On migration fallout, some called him brave, others called him reckless. But the real concern wasn't Traoré's tone, it was his logic. Because beneath the fiery rhetoric was a warning the US couldn't afford to ignore. If African economies collapse, their problems don't stay in Africa. Migration, extremism, instability. These aren't regional issues, they're global threats. And every time a factory closes in Burkina Faso, a ripple of desperation moves closer to Europe's shores, and eventually to America's strategic interests. One former ambassador to the Sahel put it bluntly on national television: "You ignore leaders like Traoré now, and you'll be dealing with a humanitarian crisis in a year." For the first time in decades, Washington wasn't just reacting to Africa, it was being challenged by it. But if America listens, can it change? Or is the system too deeply invested in the old ways of control? That's the question Traoré left hanging, and it still echoes today. What if the 30% tariff wasn't about trade at all? What if it was about control? That's the question circulating quietly among economists, journalists, and political insiders across Africa, and even in some corners of Europe. Because when you look closer at the timing, the players, and the resources at stake, the pattern becomes hard to ignore. Just 2 weeks before the tariff leak, Burkina Faso's government had announced plans to renegotiate mining contracts, specifically with foreign-owned gold companies. The country holds some of the richest untapped gold reserves in West Africa. For years, international firms, many with ties to Western capitals, have extracted billions, while local communities saw only craters and broken promises. Traoré's push to nationalize portions of the industry was bold. Too bold, perhaps. And then suddenly, a devastating tariff appears. No prior warning, no diplomatic backchannel. Just an economic weapon with surgical precision, targeting a nation daring to stand up. Coincidence? Some believe it was a message: stay in line or pay the price. But that's not all. A classified intelligence brief leaked by an anonymous source hinted at something even darker: pressure from multinational lobbying groups with deep influence in US. Trade policy. One name in particular appeared repeatedly: a gold conglomerate with strong political donations and connections to a former White House economic advisor. The pieces begin to align. An African leader challenges extraction. A Western conglomerate sees its profits threatened. Suddenly, Washington moves, not through force, through finance. Is this how the new empire operates? Not with soldiers, but with spreadsheets. And if Traoré is right, if Africa is done being silent, how far will the system go to keep things just the way they are? The phone call between Ibrahim Traoré and Donald Trump may have ended after 23 minutes, but its echoes are still traveling. Because this wasn't just a conversation between two presidents. It was a collision between two worldviews, one rooted in dominance and extraction, the other in sovereignty and dignity. And now, a question hangs in the air. Not just for Africa, but for America too. When history looks back, will the United States be remembered as a nation that helped Africa rise, or as one that tried to keep it in its place? Traore made his position clear. If America wants to be a partner, we welcome that. But if it wants to be our master, we will look elsewhere. And that's no empty threat. Already, whispers in Ouagadougou speak of new talks with China. Russian trade envoys have been spotted in gold-producing provinces. African leaders once divided are now quietly aligning around a shared sentiment. The time for waiting is over. If the West doesn't adapt, Africa will move on without it. And here's the uncomfortable truth. They might be better for it. Because what Traore demanded wasn't impossible. He didn't ask for aid. He asked for fairness. He asked to process cotton instead of exporting it raw, to value labor, to respect sovereignty, to let African economies breathe without being choked by strings attached. It was a message forged in humility and fire. So now we ask you, do you believe Africa should stand as a partner, not a pawn? Do you believe a single voice backed by principle can shake a system built on silence? If this story stirred something in you, don't let it fade. Speak, reflect, share it. Because this isn't just about Africa. It's about how we treat the people we think can't fight back, and whether we still believe that justice belongs to everyone or only to those who can afford it. May God bless Africa, land of iron, of fire, and of souls too proud to kneel.